I am so excited to see you in the last section. In this last section, we have two projects. The first one is for a cash register, and the second one is obviously is going to be our game. But this section marks a fundamental shift. Till now, we have been thinking and writing with our types. But this time, we would be seeing how we can organize the code in different layers. Just in the last section, we saw how we can create packages. Packages was one way of organizing our code. But now let's try to think beyond our packages. Let's try to think more about in the architecture point of view. Now this concept may sound a little alien, but by the time we are finished with our projects, this concept would be much clearer to you. For now, let us concentrate on the first project. So this project is all about a cash register. But before we can jump in and just start writing our code, I want us to take some time and let us think how we can design this application. So I want you to take back to the concept of VOC-DTP. So this is a very simple concept which I propose for your learning. So this concept stands for your visualize outline code. So this is your phase number one. Once you're done with the first phase, the second phase would be debug, test, and polish. Let us try to see one concept at a time. So this is going to be our problem statement. We simply want to make a simple cash register. Suppose you have a shop and you want to create a software for your cash register. So basically we just want to implement at what's happening at our checkout counter. Just try to imagine what's happening over there. Normally you would hand your items to the cashier. The cashier would scan the item. He will generate an invoice. The cashier would accept the payments and he will hand over the products to you. So out of all of these things, let us just try to concentrate on the cash register. So let us go to our first phase, which is this one, visualize, outline, and code. Inside this phase, the first step would be to visualize. Let us try to visualize how our application would look like. Let's try to imagine what's happening inside the cash register. As soon as the cashier scans an item is added to the invoice. Now what happens if the customer wants to change the quantity? The cashier can simply update the quantity. And what happens if the customer changes his mind and he wants to drop an item? Then simply cashier can delete the item from the invoice. The next thing that I want you to think is an item can also have different components such as a discount, offer, tax which can be added to the invoice. Now just to help you visualize how our code will look after implementing our cash register, I have created a nice dictionary. So let me show you. This is how our final outcome should look like. Let me zoom out a bit. Okay. So this is our final outcome. If you watch closely, it's not complicated. It's just a dictionary structure. We have a couple of keys and we have a couple of values. Let's see what keys do we have. The first key is for the customer. The next key is for the invoice total. The next one is for the items. And the last one is for the purchase date. Now let's see at the values. The value for the customer is a dictionary itself. The value for the total is a float. Now here for the items, it gets a little more interesting. This bracket to this bracket, this is the value. And inside this value, we again have dictionaries. So these are the different items. So we have one item for an apple, the next one is for an egg, next one for milk. And inside these items, we can add different components such as your discount, your quantity, and your subtotal. And for the purchase date, we simply have to display the date of purchase. That's very easy. Now, the thing is, I could visualize this data structure just because I have some practice. But the same thing can happen with you. When you practice a little bit more, you can visualize this design even before you can start coding. Let us go to the next step. Let me zoom in again. Let us go to the next step, which is outline. Here what we are trying to do is we simply want to outline our structure. So if you see right over here in this step, we have a couple of different objects. First one was for the customer, for the invoice total, items, and so on. So let us try to outline what components or what classes or what objects we would require inside our application. So here I am inside the next step for outline. Obviously we require a customer. The next thing we require is the item that the customer is buying. And the next thing, which I have already explained, we require an invoice entry. Why do we require a separate invoice entry is because different items can have different discounts or offers, or they could have some kind of taxation. So for the sake of simplicity, let us call this item as invoice item. So this means once we have the item inside an invoice, it will have a slightly different structure. And finally, we have a place called as cash register. So this object keeps a record of everything that is happening on the counter. So let's try to summarize the objects that we are going to require. So we need a customer, we need an item, we need one more for the invoice item, and the last one, obviously we require a cash register. So till now we have much more clarity about our application and the different objects that would be going inside our application. And you would be tempted to just open up your code editor and start writing your code. But I want you to hold your guns. Let's try to do a little bit more planning. So before we can write the code, let us try to describe how our objects, so that means let us try to visualize how all of these objects would look like in the world of Python. So let's see, I've created a couple of diagrams for you. This is how our customer would look like. Our customer would require a couple of instance variable. It could also have some methods and the type of them. And obviously our customer needs a first name and a last name. The type of this one is obviously going to be string. And for the sake of customer, we don't require any methods. Now let us go to the next object or the next class. So this class is for the actual item itself. We need some kind of an identifier so that every product needs a unique ID. So we can have an ID as our instance variable. Then we also need a name for an item. Then we also require a price. In this case, let us keep the type as a float because we may have some decimal places as well. The next one is a little more interesting. We also need one instance variable for the measurement unit. Here the question is, how do you measure the product? It can be in kgs, grams, liters, etc. So we need some kind of a unit that will describe how to measure this item. Now let's go to the next object or the next class. This is our invoice item. This class is pretty simple. It has to accept one item. So I have created one instance variable for the item. And since there can be some kind of a discount, we need one more instance variable for a discount, and the customer can purchase in multiple quantities. So we have one more instance variable for quantity. Now for this class, we require one more method, and that is to have our subtotal. We need some small maths over here. We need to figure out how much is the discount and how much is the quantity. So each item can have a different subtotal, and that's what we are trying to calculate inside this method. Let us go to the next and the last class that we require, and this one is for our cash register. So this class is going to record everything that is happening inside our shop. So let's have a look at the different instance variables. First, obviously it needs to know who is the customer that is making the purchase. It also needs to know the different items that are being purchased. It also needs to record the purchase date. And here you must be thinking that we require one more instance variable to display the invoice total. Well, you're right. But instead of just creating an instance variable, we are going to create a method called as get invoice total. The reason is we have different items and different items have different subtotals. So let us use this method to calculate the total of all of the subtotals. This is more of a convenience feature. Now let's see what are the methods this class is going to have. Obviously at the cash register, you can add an item, you can update an item, you can remove an item. And at the last, we can also display our invoice. So till this time, we have much more clarity on our application. We have a nice outline in place. We know which classes or which objects needs to go inside our application. We know what instance variables are required, the type of them, the methods that are required for all of these things. So we have a much better design and a much better clarity with us. And now we can think of writing all of these things inside our code editor. But before we can do that, I just wanted to show you one more thing. So the document that I have put together, this is technically also known as a unified modeling language diagram. Well, to be precise, this diagram is a little bit different from the document that I have put, but you can go to Google and check it out. I have left the links in the README file. And in fact, FreeCodeCamp has a full course on unified modeling language. You can click over here to have the link for this one. The next thing is just to translate all of this document inside the code. And I have just shown you, once we are done with our code, the cache register would look something like this. So this is what we are trying and going to code. And this structure that we are going to code can also be imagined to be a data structure. So now we get it. There is nothing big about data structures. It is just a way to represent our data. Here you can say that we have a custom data structure of the type of cache register. In the next video, we will actually start writing the code, and I will see you then.